Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if your marriage can actually protect you from feeling down after having a baby? That is the big question we're diving into today. It sounds pretty straightforward, right? A happy marriage means fewer baby blues. But as usual, science likes to dig a little deeper and ask, is it really that simple? So, a study by G and their colleagues came out saying, yes indeed, happily married moms tend to have fewer postpartum depressive symptoms. They use something called cross-legged panel models to figure this out. Now, that is a fancy way of saying they looked at how things changed over time. They tracked mothers after childbirth, checking in at 1, 6 and 12 weeks, measuring both their marital happiness and their feelings of depression. They saw this pattern and concluded that a strong marriage basically acts like a shield, preventing those depressive feelings from taking hold. Higher marital satisfaction predicted lower levels of depressive symptoms later on. Sounds pretty convincing, right? Well, that is where things get interesting and where our commentary comes in. See, some smart researchers have been looking at these cross-legged models and noticed a potential problem. They found that sometimes these models can show a connection, a supposed protective influence, even when there is no real cause and effect going on. It can be a statistical trick, an artifact of how the numbers line up, rather than a true relationship. Imagine seeing two dancers move in sync and assuming one is directly copying the other, when really they're both just following the same unseen rhythm. So the authors of this commentary, Kimmo, Sorjonen, Melin, and Marika, Melin, decided to re-examine the data from the Marital study. But they didn't have the original data, so they did something cool. They created simulated data that had all the same key features, like the number of people and the general way their answers related to each other. This is like baking a cake using a recipe's measurements, even if you don't have the exact same ingredients. And here is where it gets wild. When they applied different ways of analyzing this simulated data, they got all sorts of different results. Sometimes marital satisfaction looked like it helped reduce depressive symptoms, just like G et al. Found. But other times, it actually seemed to predict increases in depressive symptoms. And in some analyses, there was no connection at all, nothing significant to see. It's like looking at the same painting from different angles and seeing different colors. To try and get a clearer picture, they did a sort of study of studies within their own analysis called a meta-analysis. They took all these different results and averaged them out. And guess what? The final combined result wasn't significant. That flukometer, as we call the p-value, was too high to be sure it wasn't just random chance. So, the strong protective effect that G et al. Reported, it started looking a lot less certain. This doesn't mean G et al. Were wrong on purpose, but it does mean their conclusion might be based on a shaky foundation. The message here is that when you look at relationships over time, especially in non-experimental studies, where you can't control everything, you need to be super careful about jumping to conclusions about cause and effect. The authors of the commentary are suggesting a better way forward. Instead of relying on just one analysis, like the cross-legged panel model, researchers should try several different ways to analyze their data. If the main story holds up across many different approaches, then we can be more confident. But if the story changes drastically depending on the lens you use, then we need to pump the brakes and say, hold on, maybe we don't know as much as we thought. Let's talk more about this idea of a spurious effect. Imagine you have two variables, x and y. If x always seems to increase before y, you might think x causes y. But what if there is a hidden third thing, let's call it z, that actually causes both x and y to go up? The classic example is ice cream sales and drowning deaths. They both go up in the summer. Does eating ice cream cause drowning? No, the heat causes both. The paper even gives us a diagram, figure 1, which shows how this can happen. To raise a common cause, labeled CC, that influences both x and y at different times. When you look at x at time 1 and y at time 2, and try to adjust for y at time 1, you might incorrectly see a link between x at time 1 and y at time 2. Even if x doesn't directly affect y, the common cause is messing with the signal. This idea of testing multiple ways to look at the data reminds me of something called a multiverse analysis. It's like exploring different possible realities of the data to see if the main conclusion holds up in any of them. The authors are big fans of this approach. They say you can estimate the effect of x on y in 3 main ways. 1, by controlling for the starting point of y2. By controlling for the ending point of y, and 3, by not controlling for Y at all. They've used this multi-angle approach before on other studies, and now they're applying it here to the marital satisfaction and postpartum depression question. So, back to the reanalysis, they grabbed those 6 different effect estimates, 2 for each of the 3 ways of analyzing the data over the 2 time intervals. Remember, they used simulated data, but they made sure it mirrored the original study stats. This is the part that agreed with the original study. When they controlled for how depressed the moms were at the start, the data seemed to show that being happier in their marriage led to fewer depressive symptoms later. This is presented as effects 1 and 2 in figure 2. But then when they looked at it a different way, controlling for how depressed the moms were later, the relationship flipped. Now, higher marital satisfaction seemed to predict more depressive symptoms. Effects 3 and 4 in figure 2 show this reversal. Pretty confusing, right? And the third way they looked at it, where they didn't control for either the start or the end point of the depressive symptoms, showed pretty much nothing. No real connection. Effects 5 and 6 in figure 2 illustrate this lack of a clear signal. This brings us back to the meta-analysis. When they pulled all these conflicting results together, the final average showed no significant effect. It's like trying to decide if it's going to rain by asking 6 people and getting 3 who say yes, 2 who say no, and 1 who's unsure. The average answer isn't very decisive. So, what does this all mean? The authors propose another way to think about this, called the model of spurious longitudinal associations, or MOSLA. This model suggests that maybe the ups and downs in marital satisfaction and depressive symptoms aren't directly influencing each other over time. Instead, it proposes 2 main sources of influence. First, there are stable long-term individual differences, like personality traits. Some people are generally more positive or more prone to feeling down, and this affects both their marriage satisfaction and their mood consistently over time. This is represented by the stable latent factors in figure 3. GM for marital satisfaction and GD for depressive symptoms. Second, there are temporary situational factors. These are things like having a bad day, a fight with your partner, or just feeling generally stressed at that particular moment. These state factors, shown as ST1, ST2, and ST3, can influence how someone feels at each specific measurement point. The key thing about MOSLA is that it doesn't assume marital satisfaction directly causes changes in depression or vice versa from one time point to the next. It can explain the observed patterns purely through these stable traits and temporary states. And here's the kicker. When they applied this MOSLA to the data, it fit the observed correlations almost perfectly. The numbers they got, like CFI and TLI, are all really high, and RMSE is 0, meaning it's an incredibly good match. This means the observed patterns in the data can be explained just as well, if not better, by this model that doesn't assume any direct ongoing influence between marital satisfaction and postpartum depression. So, what does that really mean for us? It suggests that the connection G et al. Found might not be a direct, one-way street where a happy marriage directly prevents depression. Instead, it could be that people who are generally more stable and positive might naturally have both better marriages and fewer depressive symptoms. And then, on top of that, temporary life events or moods can influence how they feel at any given moment. Let's wrap this up. The commentary writers dove into the study by G et al., which claim marital satisfaction protects against postpartum depression. Their reanalysis using different statistical approaches produced conflicting results, sometimes showing a protective effect, sometimes an adverse effect, and sometimes no effect at all. When they pooled these results, the overall finding disappeared. They argue that the original conclusions might be based on statistical quirks, rather than a true steady influence. This is further supported by their MOSLA model, which explains the data nicely without needing a direct link between marital satisfaction and depression over time. This is a really important takeaway for anyone interested in science. Not just psychology, when we study people over time, it is super easy to see patterns and think we know exactly what is causing what. But real life is messy. There are so many factors at play, things we measure, things we don't measure, and just plain chance. So we have to be really careful about saying that A causes B just because A happened before B. The big recommendation here, and it is a good one, is for researchers to always try multiple ways of looking at their data. If your findings are only visible through one very specific statistical window, they might not be as strong as you think. It is like trying to find a hidden treasure. If you only dig in one spot, you might miss it. But if you search broadly and the treasure shows up in multiple places, you can be much more confident you found something real. This is the ideal scenario when different statistical paths all lead to the same understanding. You can really trust that finding. But when, like in this case, different models give you wildly different stories, it's a signal to slow down. It means the evidence isn't clear yet, and we shouldn't make big sweeping statements until more studies, perhaps with different approaches, shed more light. So, what's my take on this? I think this is a fantastic example of scientific self-correction. The commentary authors aren't just criticizing, they're offering a better way to think about these problems. They're showing us that even with complex statistical tools like cross-lagged panel models, we need to stay humble and critical. The idea that marital satisfaction might not be a direct shield against postpartum depression, but rather something that co-varies with other positive life factors, is a more nuanced and, I think, more realistic way to look at it. It encourages us to look for shared underpinnings rather than simple cause and effect. Future research should definitely explore these stable individual differences and situational state factors more deeply. What do you guys think? Does this make sense to you? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this breakdown helpful, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more explorations into the fascinating world of psychology. Until next time, stay curious.